Would you read a book narrated by a dead man? Hi everyone, today I decided to bring a Brazilian classic for the channel, the posthumous memoirs of Bras Cubas, or depending on the translation, Epitaph of a Small Winter. This book was originally written in 1880 and published weekly on a magazine, and later in 1881 put together to become a romance. Okay, so why, read a book narrated by a dead man? So the story of this memoirs is that Bras Cubas, our main protagonist, he decides to write his memoirs after he's dead. And that's why this book is the classic that it is, because it's uncommon, I guess. It's not very common for you to find protagonists that write about their own story after they die. And Bras Cubas opens the book telling us about the day of his funeral, and he decides to initiate the story telling us why he died, and then we follow along. This book is a classic because it's different from things that were written back in the day in Brazil, and it's still a very singular book. I really cannot think of other narratives like this. It's a funny book, it's a sarcastic book, it's a book that talks about society and makes fun of society. Bras Cubas, as the writer and the main character, he makes fun of himself and his life, and he is very honest about everything he tells, because he says that he has no regrets, and well, he's dead, so he doesn't have anything to lose by telling his story. This book is set in Brazil, as I said, in Rio de Janeiro, and it ends, well, the story follows his whole life. It talks a little bit about his childhood and stuff, but basically it ends around 1870, 1872 maybe. Before I talk a little bit about the historical context, I'm gonna tell a little bit about the story of the book itself. Bras Cubas is a rich man that comes from a rich family, and he dies alone, and on his funeral he has 11 friends and the people that work there, and he reigns, and he opens the book talking about it, and he decides to share his life with the reader, and in several moments of the book he speaks directly to the reader. It's also like a different book because it doesn't have a plot per se, because you read his whole life, but in the end there's no punchline, there's no moral, there's no lesson that you learn from his life, so there's not much of a plot, you're just reading his life. It's also it's a very different book. It's very singular because the chapters are very short. Some chapters are a phrase, some chapters are half a page. The longest chapters are 2-3 pages basically, so this has over 60 chapters. I think around 100 chapters. It's a short book. As you can see, it has 188 pages. If you're a normal reader, you probably can finish this in a day. I am a slow reader, as I mentioned before, so it took me a couple of days to finish, but it's it's a funny book, so you're gonna laugh at some points, so I think you can finish really fast. And also I feel like when the chapters are shorter, you read more because you feel like you're evolving, so you read more. And like I said, there's no plot, there's not a big thing happening in the background other than his life. So some chapters he's gonna talk about flies, he's gonna talk about random things like stars and dinners, and he's gonna describe things that, you know, don't add anything to the story per se, but it's his way to tell the story. And then you might be thinking, okay, so if the book has no plot and the book has no moral in the end, like, why this book, why you're recommending this book, and why you're talking about this book? Well, as I mentioned before, at some point, this is like the classic of the classics. And even though it has no punchline in the end, there's like no big moral revelation, it's a good case of study of society. As I mentioned, Bras Cubas, our main character, he's extremely rich. So when he tells us about his childhood, you can see how spoiled he is. Also, the book is set in the 1800s in Brazil. So you're gonna see a little bit of our political situation in the background of the story. So, for example, in that period, we were part of an empire. Brazil was an empire. We had an emperor. We had a royal family here. And at some points in the book, this is discussed as a background subject. So you can see a little bit about our society. Our capital was in Rio, where the story is set. The story is all set in Rio de Janeiro. And this is where the court was. The emperor used to live there, and Bras Cubas, as a very, very, very rich person, used to be around rich people, and you can see a little bit of the lifestyle. He talks a little bit about slaves here too. And in the period the book was written, they started to have discussions about abolishing slavery in Brazil. So even though the book doesn't make necessarily a big commentary about it, you can see a little bit of the background behind it. So even though you don't have like a traditional plot in the story, it's interesting to observe society and Brazilian society, Brazilian elite back in the day. Also, this book serves as a commentary of us people, because when you die and you have the opportunity to look back in your life and see what you did right and what you did wrong, it's different. Like, you don't have to pretend anymore. And you see that because of his status and stuff, like his life, Bras Cubas' life, was full of pretending, and make you kind of reflect a little bit about it. Even though it's not the intention of the book, I feel like it's very common and very easy for you to reflect on it and see the relationships the way they are presented here. So that's why I think so that's why I think when you put all those things together, you have this classic. And some commentaries of the book feel very modern still. I think they resonate a lot with our society still. And I think this is a good introduction to Brazilian literature. If you're... Okay, I don't remember where I stopped, so let's talk about the author of the book, the original author, the author behind the author. This book was written by Machado de Assis. And who is this guy, and why I'm taking time to talk about him? Well, Machado de Assis is one of the biggest authors in Brazilian literature, if not the biggest. He wrote a lot of classics, this one, but there is another one more specifically that it's also very commented. I can bring a different video about it. It's very interesting too. He has a very particular way of writing his books. And well, not only books, but he also wrote a lot of poems and a lot of plays. And what is interesting about this author is that he witnessed a lot of changes in Brazil, because he was alive during periods that are very they were very important for our story as a country. So for example, this book is set in the 1870s and was written in that period too. And in that period, Brazil was in war, in the Paraguay War. It's like basically the biggest war in Latin America. You know, like Argentina and Uruguay, other countries were part of it, and that played a big role in our own history, because this war, you know, took a while, a lot of money, a lot of people died, and this made the monarchy look really bad, and people started to question if we should have a monarchy. And then, you know, one thing led to another. A couple years later, few years later, we had the end of the monarchy and we started to be a republic. Also in that meantime, we had the abolishment of slavery. That was also a big thing. And like, this author was here to see all of this. He was basically in Rio where everything was happening. He was friends with also very important people. So, you know, I think his perspectives about those types of subject, they translate to his works, not only this book but other books. But this book specifically marks a different phase on his writing. He had more romantic books, and this book is more of his first realist from the realism school of writing. And this is like the first realist book of Brazil. I don't know if I'm using the right term, so I might have some subtitles here. But it was like the first of this kind in Brazil, and inspired other authors to write about the realism. And I think the most important thing to talk about this author, Machado de Assis, is that he was a black man. And to achieve the level of recognition that he had during his life and after, you know, like the legacy that he has in history is like something that should be acknowledged, and I think everyone should know about it, because again, I don't know if it's clear by now. Slavery was still a thing in Brazil, and he was black. He was son of mixed people. His parents were free slaves and stuff, so he was born free, but he was like mixed to black. So he never went to college. He had an okay to bad education growing up, like going to public schools and this type of stuff. And he never went to university, and still he became the biggest author in Brazilian history and is remembered to this day. And he wrote like super important pieces for our history, and that is an achievement. He spent his whole life in Rio. He never left Rio City, not only Rio State, but Rio City. And he became, after he was like a teen, starting adulthood, he started to work, and he became interested in literature, in writing, and then like he paved his own way into the upper society. And he was friends with very important people, and all by talent and like going after information and going after books and stuff. So I think that's also very remarkable, not only the work itself, but the person who wrote it. And I think this is very important. And overall, I want to recommend this book to you guys for the ones that don't know about it. Usually when you look into Brazilian literature, this is the first book that you're going to be recommended. And this author is the first author that is going to be recommended, Machado de Assis. He's the man. A few other books of him appear on the top 5. So I think this is a good introduction if you want to get to know a little bit of our literature. I think we have a lot of rich stuff. I think this is awesome. Like, this is the most unique book you're gonna find. And I mean, this book is usually recommended for teens during high school, which is not ideal, because if you ask a teen, they're gonna say this book is boring and blah blah blah. I first read this book in high school. This is the same copy. And also some, I don't know how to say this in English, but side note, here, when you're gonna apply to public schools that are the most important universities in Brazil, the most important are the public universities. When you're gonna apply to them, you have to make like a big test, and they usually ask you before you take this test to read some books, because they're gonna talk about those books, especially because it's divided by sections, so like math and biology and chemistry and Portuguese. So when you're gonna take the Portuguese section of this text, they ask you to read some books, because they're gonna talk about those books, those books that like are super important for Portuguese and art history. And this is one of the books that they ask, because it's amazing. That's all I'm saying. And it's very important. So it's part of our education too. Not all the teens read it, but you know, we're supposed to read. I remember like not even half of my class read this book when the teacher asked us. Like, we had to do tests and assignments and stuff, and barely anyone read it. But anyway, back to the point. I think this is a great introduction to the literature. It's a light book, short, unique, and again, I think it gives an insight of a very specific period and society, a part of society of Brazil. And I don't know, this book makes me really proud of being Brazilian, and I feel excited to share it with you guys. So please give it a chance, and if you read it already, please let me know in the comments. I'm gonna love to talk about it. And I want to bring more videos about Brazilian books and Brazilian authors, and I hope you guys stick to me and the channel and follow and see what else we have to bring to the table, I guess. And if you already read another Brazilian author, please let me know also. I would love to talk about it and discover different books too, because I have to be honest, I read a lot of classics, but I don't really read contemporary books. I don't know if this is a word, but anyway, modern Brazilian books I have to read more, I guess. And this is going to be an awesome opportunity to share with you guys. And before I go, I also want to ask you a question for you to leave in the comments. What is the most different book, more differentiated book that you ever read? Something on the posthumous memoirs of Bras Cubas style. I try not to say much the title during the video because it's kind of a long title. But I am interested to know if you guys ever read something similar, something that different with a different structure, and I would love some recommendations. And thank you for watching. Thank you for watching my previous videos if you did, and I'll see you next time. Bye!